Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, here we are. We're in. Okay, so for those people unfamiliar with my voice, my name is Peter Mingils. We run a sales course called Making Sales or Making Excuses. You'll see my phone number somewhere up on top if you're looking at your screen. And we're talking today about a few things, and I might make this little portion available as a little snippet of what it's like to take the Making Sales or Excuses sales course. So we were speaking about this yesterday, but I'm just going to refine it a little bit today. And it was about when you're working your leads, especially early on, some of the key components initially, as well as some of the other factors that you need to have in a good presentation if you're going to be expecting to be able to sell more product or maybe recruit more people to help you sell more product as well. So I started off yesterday with talking about the 4-door approach. And this was an interesting concept that I had learned in my direct sales profession. So for those people familiar with what we're talking about, you're just going to hear it one more time. The 4-door approach was something that I learned from a manager that I had when I was in direct sales. And just imagine we were in whatever kind of a sales office you might think, and it was a upstairs office of a retail location with a company called Electrolux. So I was in West Hempstead, and we were upstairs where we had our meeting rooms. They used to have the meeting rooms sometimes above the stores, and everybody was looking at where they were going to work. So we were canvassing, and they were looking at a map, and somebody said, well, I did that one, so we have to move further west or further east. I don't remember if it was east or west, doesn't matter. But they said, oh, we did that block. So everybody said, oh, okay. And then we were planning on where we were going to move a little bit later on. We kind of worked in packs and herds and sometimes met for lunch, or we wouldn't want to step over each other. So that's kind of like the way we worked. And then I don't remember the transition because I didn't think it was going to be that meaningful when the transition happened. But one of the guys pulled me aside, and I think it was my manager. His name was Joe. He said to me, Peter, a block's really never worked until you've worked every house on the block. So think of like a city block, like stop sign to stop sign, or a rural block, stop sign to stop sign, where there'd be like 7 to 10 houses on the left and 7 to 10 houses on the right, and separated by stop signs. So he said, a block's really never worked until you've knocked on every door at least 4 times when the person answered. So every door 4 times somebody had to answer, not just knock on the door, leave a card, but somebody actually answered the door. And I said, 4 times? So I was inquisitive. I wasn't questioning like, in an arrogant way. I was like inquisitive, and I was like, 4 times? So because I had some experience on knocking some doors, and I was only knocking on the door once. And if they weren't home, I'd knock again, but if they said they weren't interested, we kind of like usually move on to the next one. So I said, Joe, 4 times. I said, why would you do that 4 times? And he says, it's real simple. The first time you knock on the door, you're a total stranger. And I agreed. I don't know if he tied me down, meaning like closed me on that little concept. He didn't say like, what do you think, or am I right, or whatever. I don't remember what he said because I wasn't sure it was going to be so monumental of a conversation I'd be talking about 30 years later. So he said, the first time you knock on the door, you're a total stranger. I said, yeah. And, I figured, they're making a decision based on what I'm there for. And he said, well, do you think they treat total strangers then a little bit differently than people that they are familiar with? And the answer is, yeah, I guess, right? I've never really thought about it that way, Joe. And then if I playfully say, he didn't say this to me at this time, but he probably said it to me another time. He probably said, there's probably a lot of things, Peter, that you didn't think about. Ronnie told me that one. Like Ronnie was Joe's manager I met several years later. And when I would say stuff, he would sometimes throw it back at me in a slightly intimidating way that would make me think, not feel bad, but think. So when I said, Ronnie, I never really thought about it that way, he'd say, yeah, I know. There's a lot of things that you never really think about. And then he'd kind of like leave it dangling and hanging. So I'll just leave that with you. So in reference to Joe, I said, I really never really thought about it that way, Joe. He says, well, how about when you knock on the door the second time? Are you a total stranger? And I said, based on the way I think you just said that word total stranger, you emphasized the word total, the answer is probably not. He said, well, what did they remember about you? I'm like, Joe, I just asked you a question, like, why would you knock on 4 doors? A door to 4 times. So I said, okay, I'll play. What would they think about me? They would remember what I look like. They would remember, whether I was a, white guy, black guy, tall, nice-looking, poorly dressed, nice-looking, nicely dressed, where I stood, all that sort of stuff, maybe what I was there for. So they probably, you know what, now that I'm thinking about it, they probably know a little bit about me, because even if they slammed the door on me the first time, they still kind of looked at me, formed some kind of a first opinion. So they probably remember a lot of things about me, whether I realize it or not. And also, if you really think about it, and then I kind of go on, if you really think about it, Joe, they also are rethinking everything they attached to why I was there the first time. So if you really think it through, when I knocked on the door the first time, even if I said anything, they made up a story about me in their mind of who I was and what I was there for, and maybe based on some previous experiences. Now, maybe some people just forgot everything about me, but some of them actually made up a little story about what I was there for. So when I knocked on the door the second time, not only was I not a total stranger, but I came with this existing story that they fabricated about me, and I don't even know how much of it is right, but I'm not a total stranger anymore. He says, well, if you knock on the door the second time, how many times do you think people actually would ever think about knocking on the door the second time, even if they said they weren't interested? I'd say, whoa, well, I left my competition on the door at that one, because most people would never call back the second time. If I dialed the first time, or I knocked on the door the first time and they said, no, thank you, I'm not interested, or even if they were kind of nasty, most people would never go back, because they would write down in their little canvassing book, not interested, or mean, or worse, whatever kind of a word that somebody might, or a series of words that people might put in there to kind of describe that person. So the second time, hardly anybody ever knocks on the door the second time, Joe. He says, well, the second time, at least, they might be a little bit perplexed, because they're not used to people knocking on the door the second time, especially if they treated you kind of poorly the first time. I said to myself, okay, this is going to take a little bit of, I don't know what word you're going to assign. So what word do you use when you want to say, this is going to take a little bit of courage, a little bit of, I don't know which word to use politely, but this is going to take a little bit of guts, a little bit of chutzpah. I'll use some of those words. What is it going to take to dial or to call on the person the second time? And even if it doesn't go right, Joe, what happens the third time? So it's kind of interesting the third time. By now, they probably even remember your name. They certainly know why you're there. But also, maybe some things have been happening that are working to your advantage. And I said, Joe, you got to help me out with this one. I don't get in that one. And he said, well, think it through, right? Remember me? I'm the guy who doesn't think about a lot of things, so you've got to think it through. So he says, well, start to think it through. What happened when between the first and the second and the third time? And I'd say, well, lots of things happened. So I had to think it through. So he made me think it through. Lots of things happened, Joe. When I was on that block, people notice. Like, don't they look out the window? They peek through the blinds. They kind of peek around the corner. They stand in their driveway, making believe they're walking their dog while they're checking you out. And I said, yeah, all those things are going on. So they're kind of checking you out. And do you think that maybe if you did a demonstration on that block, they talk to their neighbors? Like, what would you do? Like, my neighbor, one of my neighbor's names is Dave. What would you do if a guy did a demo in Dave's house, and then later on that day, Dave was putting out his garbage or mowing his lawn, or you guys just hanging out talking about the Jets game? What would you do? Well, I'd probably say, who was that guy that knocked on your door? It's the same guy that knocked on my door. So, right? So you guys would be talking. And when Dave was talking to you, Peter, about the event, it's coming through Dave's mouth, so make sure you do the right demo for Dave. But Dave is going to say whatever he's going to say. Oh, there's a young guy named Pete. He's in the management training program. Nice kid, and he shampooed a carpet, got that spot out that I wasn't able to get out, from Millie, the Great Dane dog, and poop all over the place, or a blood stain or something like that. And it was really kind of neat because I needed the furniture moved, and he kind of moved something for me. And, a real nice guy. Matter of fact, in a happy way, he might even say, and I decided I really liked the product, so I bought it. And I love it. And he's a good kid. Showed up, next day, kind of showed me how to do the stuff. I gave him 3 referrals, a bottle of wine or whatever, fed him for dinner. So whatever the guy is going to say as people talk when they get a chance to talk freely. And then how about when you knock on that guy's door, the neighbor who just heard that interesting story, now here's the punchline, did something happen on your behalf that you couldn't directly but indirectly controlled, and did it work to your advantage? And the answer in that example would be yes. So if I did the right thing in the neighbor's house, I did the demo, and then I knocked on that guy's door, the next door neighbor, the next day, after he had basically been pre-sold by the demo of the neighbor that I did, then when I'm knocking on that door that third time, maybe it's a totally different conversation. Now, there's a reason why I'm telling you these stories, so it's going to blend into, of course, whatever we're talking about relative to working leads. But the reason why I tell you these stories is hopefully you can kind of, like me, start to think, oh yeah, you know, I never really thought about that, but yes, those things happen. Something was working in my behalf that I wasn't really in control of or aware of, but it happened. And when I knocked on that door the third time, I got a chance to take advantage of that, and it didn't take any more talent than to knock on the door the third time. And then, of course, if you knocked on the door the fourth time, maybe more things might have been happening on your behalf, because now, if you knocked on the guy's door the first time, the second time, and the third time, and you drove down or your car showed up on the block, they were definitely looking for what you are there for, and he's also probably wondering when you're going to knock on his door. So I'm using a door-to-door analogy only so you can paint a picture in your mind, so you can kind of see this is how I grew up. So in my world, it was common that a door was never really done until you've knocked on and spoke to someone at least 4 times. Now, I will ask you this question. Oh, so also Joe said never do anything on the block that you wouldn't want people to see. So if there was a garbage pail that was rolling in the middle of the street on a windy day, pick it up. If there were a gate that was left open, close it. If there was anything you could do that would be nice and courteous, do that as well. A guy who was stuck in the ice, you know, if you're walking by and all it takes is a push. You know, I can't tell you how many little walkways I've dusted off with snow, or, you know, different things that I might have done in a polite fashion. Sometimes even walked, you know, groceries in from somebody at a car. Here, let me help you with that. I got nothing else to do. I could use the exercise. Whatever it might be. So as I sold myself to a lot of the people, they would see that sort of stuff. So when you knocked on the door the first time, the second, the third, the fourth, I became known, if you will, as the vacuum guy, which wasn't necessarily what I went to college for, but I was known as the vacuum guy. And I also trained my sales force to kind of do the same thing, and those that would listen and apply this stuff, and most didn't. But those that would and would listen would get the benefits of this stuff as well. So why do I say these things on this? Is because, as you can kind of hear, sometimes a block, a home, a demo is developed over time. And if you just looked at it as a single event, that'd be like knocking on that door for the very first time, forming a conclusion that there was a sale in that house or on that block or not. And I think that would be a mistake. So, because you didn't let that sale or whatever develop. And some of the best ones also came from some of the toughest ones initially, because people do treat strangers differently than they treat people that they're more familiar with. So that's why we call it the 4-door approach. So how does that affect, or how does that work relative to making your phone calls? Well, just like when I just said a little bit earlier, when you pick up the phone, you make that phone call, they don't know who you are. And if you've listened to our icebreaker training, you know that many times people will think that you're probably trying to sell them something, because when somebody calls you and you don't know who they are, even if you're interested in buying, consider them a sales rep. And no matter what you say in their brain, it still comes out that you're a sales rep. So regardless of what words comes out of your mouth, until you've sold yourself and start to build some level of relationship, get past that person that answered the phone, because the person that picked up the phone isn't the real person yet. Until you get beyond that, you're really not talking to the individual. You're talking to the person that shows up when a stranger answers the door. You're talking to the person that shows up that picks up the phone, where there might and probably would be a telemarketer on the other end. So when you first pick up the phone and you're calling them, you're breaking their preoccupation. They were probably doing something else, a whole bunch of other things that are happening. Unless you kind of dig in, crack them open, start to have a conversation, get them to relax a little bit, sell yourself, you really have no idea whether there's a sale in that house or not. So that's the four-door approach. So many times, here we are in the leads business, I get a phone call from someone who just got their leads and is now going to explain to me, just imagine how that might sound. They're going to explain to me how after they called someone for the very first time that this isn't working, or the lead was bad, or they weren't really as excited as they were supposed to be, and I say to myself, oh my, you probably haven't heard my four-door explanation, because if you did, you wouldn't be calling me after day one. You'd probably be calling me a little bit later on, and we wouldn't be talking about that, because that would be handled already because you handled it in the first phone call. So when you first meet someone, you're a total stranger, and they're a little bit different. You don't really meet ever the real person almost all the time. You meet the person that shows up to a total stranger. So you got to get in. Get into what? Get into a conversation. What conversation? Probably doesn't matter. Just loosen them up a little bit. You have 100 kinds of ways, 100 being just a number, multiple ways of being able to go in there and manage your way through any of those different scenarios to get them talking. So I put up over here time, and on time, this stands for timing, the icebreaker itself, mood, and enthusiasm, because what I found, as I had to teach this to my sales guys and gals, what I found was that I would say, what are the variables that determine a good icebreaker or not, or a good first phone call or not? And sometimes it was the timing of my call. And sometimes it was the icebreaker that I used. It was either a good one or a bad one. My mood sometimes would affect things. Their mood would sometimes affect things. And then also levels of enthusiasm. So let me just kind of sell you on timing for 1 second. I want you to take a look at your day today, depending on whenever you're listening to this. So look at your day today and start from the time you woke up to the time you go to bed, and ask yourself every 30 minutes, so every half hour, would that have been a good time for someone to call you? So say you wake up at 7 o'clock. Is it a good time if somebody woke you up at 7? Or how about 7:30? Or how about at 8 o'clock? So force yourself, if you will, to just play with this exercise one time, just to prove this to yourself that timing sometimes matters, and ask yourself in whatever day you pick if it would have been a good time for someone to call you at every 30 minutes. So at 7 o'clock, 7:30, 8 o'clock. And you might hear things like, well, where were you at 8:30? Well, at 8:30, say, for instance, you've got kids and they have to get off for school, the poop's hitting the fan. Is it a good time to call somebody 8:30 when the poop's hitting the fan because everybody's running late, they can't find their lunch, blah, 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 where's the rain jacket, where's the permission slips? Is that a good time to call? Maybe not. How about 9:30? Kids are already gone. You've already been able to get, your drink, vodka, Valium, whatever it might be. You're a little bit more relaxed. I'm, of course, playing in that example. But maybe 9:30 would be much better because nobody was in the house. Now, what about at, 10 o'clock? What about at 10:30? What about at 11? What about 11:30? So look at those types of things and then ask yourself, if someone had interrupted my day during that time, how would I have reacted? And then you'll certainly see that timing was everything, which even makes it more ridiculous, if you don't mind me saying ridiculous, when somebody calls me up and they say, well, I called this guy, and I'm like, okay, did you catch him during the right time, or did you catch him during the wrong time? So you're calling me because you didn't listen to this training, because timing's sometimes an issue, and maybe if you call them a half an hour one way early or later, totally different scenario. I stands for ice breaking. The icebreaker would be like the words that you're going to use. You're using something that's thought-provoking, you're giving it all away. Do you sound like a salesperson? If you sound like a salesperson, maybe they're going to treat you like one, and that's usually not very good, especially if you haven't sold yourself. Mood, that's for the M. Your mood, hopefully, you'll be able to control, right? Positive, uplifting, all that sort of stuff. How about their mood? Can you control their mood? Well, just like timing, sometimes you're going to catch people in the wrong mood. I'll use an example. I don't know how it is, but I'm getting bombarded with robo-dialers. I have 4 phone numbers sitting in front of me, not including the virtual phone numbers that we have. And there's people that must have my phone number somewhere. I don't know if I did it, divine intervention, a little bit of karma, I'm not sure. But my phones are ringing off the wall all day long for some robo-dialer trying to sell me either security systems, or Google is trying to get me placed for free, or it's one of you guys that these stupid robo-dialers that tell me that it's the most important phone call I'll ever listen to in my whole entire life. Or they're pleading with me, don't hang up yet. This is a call like no other. And then I'll get on line number 2, line number 3, number 4, number 5. So even me in the leads business are saying those stupid calls. So what if somebody calls me right after that, after like a string of all my phones going off the wall where I got interrupted everywhere because they thought it was somebody important? And therefore, sometimes mood matters, and my level of enthusiasm or your level of enthusiasm is important as well. So you can control some of those things, but you'll also see you can't control others, hence the reason for the 4-door approach. I use 4 doors only because that's the way I learned it. Now you know why I might call it the 4-door approach. But calling back multiple times, even if you're talking to somebody. So always leave the door open in a phone call where you can always follow up or follow through. So this way, when you're making that 2nd, 3rd, or 4th call, you haven't put yourself in an awkward position. Now, the next part is kind of like a continuation of that. There are 5 things you need in a presentation to be able to sell. So there's 5 things you need to have in a presentation to be able to sell, and those things are, whoops, I saw a spelling mistake. Common sense, be in the head. I am looking at my notes over here just so you can see my notes as well. Common sense, goes a long way. Be in the head of the person that you're speaking with as well as in your own head. So when you're talking to people, at least you know what's going on in your brain and your body, like what you're going through, and then also what they're going through as well. So try to emphasize what they're going through as well as what you're going through. But this also falls into the 5 things you need inside a presentation. You need an abbreviation given to me by a gal that trained me. She was a manager trainee with me in one of my offices over in Roslyn. We used to call it Miracle Mile. Her name was Eva. And Eva is, I'm going to say she was, because I haven't spoken to her in like a million years. So Eva was a little girl in almost the equivalent of a guy's locker room. So I had a lot of guys working with me in my office. So many of the people that I would track be guys. And Eva was this little girl, little squirt, if you will. She was kind of like 4 foot nothing. And, kind of snarky, kind of cute, kind of like, she can fight back because she was hanging with the guys in the locker room. And we used to go over these 5 things: show the need, sell yourself first, show the need, build value, create desire of ownership, qualify, and close. And I would sit there on a chalkboard or a whiteboard, and we would write all these things down. And every day, she could sense my frustration because the guys weren't getting it. Like, what are the 5 things, guys? And nobody would know. So it'd be like, we just went over this yesterday. So of course, Eva, being the little squirt that she was, she says, well, you dumb, and you can fill in the sentence of what you think she might have said. And it was a polite word, like, you dummies. Like, Peter, you must be like really frustrated. All these dummies in this class haven't been able to figure out the 5 things, and you go over it every day. Every day. And the only reason why I remembered it is because I went over it every day with all these dummies that she called dummies. And they were all kind of dumb. They were salespeople of mine, but they were still kind of dumb because they couldn't remember these things. They could still make sales, but they couldn't remember this. It's just like, these knuckleheads, they can't remember any of this stuff, and I figured out a way that I can remember it. Maybe you could teach it to these idiots. And this is the way we politely spoke amongst each other in an affectionate way. So this isn't being mean or crude. This is just kind of like the way people talk to each other in the offices that I used to run when we worked with people, and you liked them and you wanted to give them a little noogie. So it would be like, these dummies, I can't remember this anything. And she said, well, I'm going to remember Silly Sally Bungles catches quickly. And I said, Silly Sally Bungles catches quickly? What the heck is that? And she put it out. She said, well, sell yourself, that's S. Next one is show the need. B is bungles, like for build value. Then C, create desire of ownership. Then C, qualify and close, or Q rather, qualify and close. SS, BCQ. Silly Sally bungles catches quickly. And I'd say, Eva, that's the stupidest, playfully, because she's a little squirt, kind of cute, in a snarky kind of a way, and she's kind of like calling all of us dummies, including me, like the trainer of all the dummies who still couldn't figure out how to get people to remember it. So I'm like, Eva, how in the world am I going to ever, I'm not going to teach these guys Silly Sally bungles catches quickly. And she said, maybe you won't, but you'll remember it. And I said, yeah, I guess. Silly Sally bungles catches quickly. And guess what? It was like 1985, I think, where she taught me Silly Sally bungles catches quickly. And if you're good at math, you realize, hell, that was a long time ago. 85, 95, 105, 150. Holy smokes. That's a long time ago, and you're still remembering SSBCQ. Silly Sally bungles catches quickly. So sometimes goofy things from people who you haven't spoken to for almost 30 years can remind you of some pretty cool stuff. So Silly Sally bungles catches quickly. Sell yourself first. That is key. Remember, these are the 5 components of determining whether you're going to sell someone or not, or if there's a sale in there or not. The next one, show the need, build value, create desire of ownership, qualify and close. How crazy, I'm being polite, it would be for someone to say on a first phone call that, well, I don't think he was interested. How could he be interested when you didn't get a chance to go over SSBCQ? How could he be interested if he was talking to the total stranger as opposed to the person that might be open? How in the world could you ever make that decision? How in the world could you prejudge so much to tell me that in 30 seconds or 60 seconds after your very first phone call, the person that might not be interested, or they weren't interested, or they weren't very enthusiastic, or they weren't very anything? You never really got to the real person yet. You never got to the real person yet. Now, by the way, so when I was training my sales force, we used to apply all this stuff, and it would work. And I was always glad that competitors in other offices weren't training their salespeople on this stuff because we would beat them. But if you're listening here, you're probably one of our customers, so we want to make sure that you can successfully apply some of these principles. And most won't, just so you know. We're already kind of familiar with that because those dummies in my other office didn't either sometimes, and people like me and Eva just remembered Silly Sally bungles catches quickly, or Chris this, and Bassam this, and all those other guys probably are still using those types of things. But the reality is, remember, those are the 5 key ingredients, and how in the world are you ever going to really know whether there was a sale in that house or not unless you've been able to do a full demo? So otherwise, they were treating you like just a sales guy. So SSBCQ. So here's my summary. You got to get in to a selling situation. And then when you're in, then you have to do something relative to the 5 key ingredients. Sell yourself, show the need, build value, create desire of ownership, qualify and close. Those are those keys that you need to do if you're going to be successful. Sell yourself. How do you sell yourself? You know you've sold yourself when you're having a relaxed conversation with another human being. How do you sell yourself? Well, we used to say if you're going to sell vacuums, talk about vacuums. If you're going to sell books, talk about books. If you're going to sell yourself, let them talk about themselves, and then be genuinely interested in working with people. So if it's only to try to set them up for your sale, then you probably are not genuinely interested in their situation. And I'm not saying that you have to be on the phone for 100 hours and make friends forever and have like your best buddy, your business soulmate. I'm saying just kind of get a conversation started. Find out what's important to them. You might find out that they are a lot deeper than you would have ever prejudged. So people are deep, people are complex, people will move mountains for things that are important to them. And maybe they might be able to find those things that are important to them through you and the opportunity you have, but you got to get it out of them. So as soon as they can see that you might be the vehicle towards getting what they want out of life, That's when you'll find their passion and their motivation, and you won't find that out in the first 30 seconds of a very first phone call. Show the need. Do you have something that they need? So show them. Is it residual income? Is it good income? Is it a great product? Is it a benefit? Show them that they need it. Not that just you have it, you throw some benefits at them, but show them. We used to show people they needed our vacuum by grabbing their Hoover or their Kirby out of their closet and then sweeping with theirs and then sweeping ours behind it and show them all the stuff their Kirby left behind. Build value. Put it in their hands. Let them feel the sense of ownership. Build value that also creates desire of ownership. Do those types of things, and then cue, qualify, and close. Help them make a decision. Most people have to say no a few times before they say yes. So if I just told you that most people have to say no a few times before they say yes, what do you think I say to someone maybe that calls me and says the person said no? I say, well, I know you weren't on my training, because if you're telling me they said no, was it the first time they said no or the 5th time they said no? And most of the people that I talk to that say the person said no has never been here, so if I asked the question of the first time or the 5th time, they wouldn't understand what I'm talking about. So therefore, most people that work leads have a different way of working leads if they don't understand these principles that I'm kind of displaying right now. So these are some of the key elements. Now, do you think when I first got started in selling that I knew all this stuff? The answer was no. Do you think it took some time and frustration? The answer, of course, would be yes. But it was something. Do you think it was worth learning? And the answer to me was sure, especially if it's going to determine my success and maybe my income. Absolutely, positively. And do I learn things from things that go right? Yes. Do I learn things from things that don't always go right? The answer is yes. I make adjustments along the way. You can call them whatever you want, but the reality is they're all learning experiences. So if I use everything that happens as a learning experience and then apply these principles, do you think I can get better? And then most importantly, how do you teach other people the same thing? That's one of the reasons why we put it on the recording, so they'll be able to listen over and over again. So for those people listening in, you heard about the 4-door approach. You heard about the 5 things, and now maybe you have a slightly different perspective. So if you say to yourself, I really didn't think about that, I can then echo what Ronnie said to me, which was, you know, there's a lot of things I bet you really didn't think a lot about. So if you're listening in, call us and make sure you take more of our training.